on higher readiness, capability building and development, adaptation of NATO's command and control structures, creating and sustaining more enablement, which is logistics, host nation support, maintenance, military mobility, and replenishment and prepositioning of stocks. And, crucially, more collective defense exercises and training. To give you an example, in 2024, the Alliance will be holding its largest collective defense exercise since the Cold War, Steadfast Defender. Over 40,000 troops from across the Alliance will exercise in Germany, Poland, and the 3 Baltic states. A new era of collective defense is upon us. And the NATO military authorities have been preparing for this new era for years. We have never been stronger or readier. And yet, much more needs to be done in order to not only protect ourselves against current threats, but also against reconstituted threats and potential future threats. For that, we need a fundamentally different approach to public-private cooperation in the defense and security sector. Today, the Chiefs of Defense expressed their concern that across the Alliance, production capacity is lagging behind. Delivery times are moving to the right, and prices for equipment and ammunition are shooting up. Right now, we are paying more and more for exactly the same. And that means that we cannot make sure that the increased defense spending actually leads to more security. At the Vilnius summit, NATO allies approved a new defense production action plan to accelerate joint procurement, boost production capacity, and enhance allies' interoperability. Our liberal economies are not apt at creating the prioritization that is so desperately needed right now. This is about sustaining the foundation of security upon which our economies can flourish. Long-term stability needs to prevail over short-term profits. As we have seen in Ukraine, war is a whole-of-society event. Therefore, the prevention of war through resilience and deterrence should also be a whole-of-society event. Ladies and gentlemen, the Chiefs of Defense all expressed today their immense respect and admiration for our Ukrainian brothers and sisters in uniform. We are doing everything in our power to support them in their rightful claim for freedom and sovereignty. Every day, the Ukrainian armed forces are gaining ground on the battlefield. Every success is one step closer to victory. And even though the Russian leadership is unfortunately more than willing to let both their own population and the Ukrainian people endure senseless suffering, Ukraine will outlast and outperform them. And we will help them every step of the way. President Putin wanted NATO divided and made every attempt to do so. And yet, here we stand, more united than ever. United in our belief that the rule of law applies to all, that conflict should be solved in the courtroom, not on the battlefield, and that self-determination is an unalienable right. Ladies and gentlemen, this meeting comes at a challenging time. I want to thank General Christoffersen wholeheartedly for the outstanding way in which the Norwegian authorities have hosted this meeting. There are more than 3 million servicemen and women who will do whatever it takes to protect every inch of Allied territory and every single one of the 1 billion citizens who live on Allied soil. It is the solemn duty of the Chiefs of Defense to make sure they are able to fulfill their important tasks to the best of their abilities. We serve them as they serve our alliance. And together, we will make sure that we are ready to face any adversary in any domain, in any corner of the Euro-Atlantic area. And that brings me to my final statement. I would like to share with you the news that today the Chiefs of Defense decided to extend my mandate as chair of the NATO Military Committee for an additional 6 months, and to elect the Italian Chief of Defense, Admiral Dragone, as my successor for a period of 2.5 years. The exact handover date will be agreed by Admiral Dragone and myself at a later date. I congratulate Admiral Dragone on being elected for this position. I'm honored and humbled by the continued trust that the Allied Chiefs of Defense have placed in me. I will do my utmost to keep unifying North, South, East, West, large and small, within the alliance, and to actively reach out to NATO's partners around the world, building on the fundamental belief that there is so much more that unites us than what divides us, and that we are truly stronger together. General Christopherson, the floor is yours.
So thank you, Rob, and just let me add a few points. First of all, I would say, Admiral Bauer, let me thank you for your steady leadership, bringing the Chief of Defences from all the NATO countries together, and for making the Military Committee an important platform where we have discussed for years now, but also today, our military strategy and how things are decided. I would also like to thank you, the press, for being here with us today. An open press plays an immensely important role in our democracy. It has actually been a great and sincere pleasure to host the NATO Military Committee conference here in Oslo. It has been a very good conference indeed, and Admiral Bauer just explained some of the outcomes. And I would again say we are met here in peaceful Oslo in an uncertain and unsecure time. The Ukrainian people are fighting for their homeland, for their peace, freedom and democracy. These are values we share and hold very high. Our Ukrainian friends are also fighting a battle on all our behalf for a functioning, rules-based world order, which Russia has challenged for years. We will continue to support that fight. We will continue to support with donations, with training, and we will continue to support in close cooperation with industry. I am very impressed with the Ukrainian people's will and ability to fight back. And as Admiral Bauer said, it is truly a whole of society effort in Ukraine. And it cannot be said often enough, NATO stands more united than ever. This has been evident throughout this conference as well. Putin's war on Ukraine has brought us even closer. Admiral Bauer mentioned the NATO exercise Steadfast Defender. An important element of that big exercise is to be held in the Nordic countries, and we have called it Nordic Response in 2024. The 5 Nordic countries have come together to host NATO allies to train and exercise in our part of the world as part of also the big Steadfast Defender exercise. This exercise will be an important milestone in a common Nordic further integration into NATO and our new plans, which we have discussed today. Once Sweden is formally accepted into the alliance, it will fundamentally change the way we look at defense and deterrence in NATO's northern flank. Having all the Nordic countries as part of the world's strongest military alliance is good for our region, it's good for Norway, but it's also a great strengthening of NATO and the whole alliance. All our defense industries in all countries will continue to play an important role in the times lay ahead, both to be able to supply our Ukrainian friends, but also to ensure that we in NATO can reach the goals discussed today. Boosting production and increasing cooperation are 2 key issues. We are on the right track, but we must continue to improve how we, together with industry, develop and procure military capabilities. Once again, it has been a pleasure to host the Military Committee Conference here in Oslo. NATO is the cornerstone of Norwegian security, and we are proud to be part of the strongest military alliance in the world. And again, ladies and gentlemen of the press, thank you for being here. Now we look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, General Admiral. Now we will be taking your questions. There is a microphone over there that will be handed around. Let me start with you, sir, and can I ask you to please state your name and outlet? Thank you. Yep.
Yes, my name is Mikael Hem. I work for Forsvarets Forum, the national defense news magazine of Norway. I have a question for Mr. Christoffersen. When it comes to military equipment production, do you think there are certain priorities that Norway could contribute to, that we are better suited to produce than other countries?
So the Norwegian defense industry is very good. It's high quality. It produces, as we know, NASAM systems, air defense systems. We have production of artillery rounds. And those are two of the things that are most needed, both in Ukraine, but also in NATO. So increasing the Norwegian production would help the two things we are standing in, which gives us this demand for more material equipment, to continue to support Ukraine, which we'll all do for a long time, as long as it takes. At the same time, we are rebuilding our stocks on what we are donating to Ukraine. And at the same time, we have new force requirements to strengthen NATO. So Norwegian industry plays an important role in that.
Ma'am, here at the front, please. Alex? Oh, okay. Yeah, that works.
Okay. Hi, Missy Ryan from the Washington Post. Thank you. I just wanted to ask a little bit more about the production problems and challenges that you cited, Admiral Bauer. Could you talk a little bit about, and the price increases that you said would potentially eat into the impact of the budget increases? Could you talk a little bit about what are the factors driving the delays and the price increases? Are there material shortages, input shortages? What are the things that you all are trying to get at in order to deal with that problem? And to what extent has the EU's efforts to pool defense funding for munitions and other defense items been able to address this issue? Thanks.
Okay, it's a very relevant question, and if things would have been extremely easy, there was a simple answer to your question, and that is of course not the case. So it's a number of things that add up to the problem, basically. One is that in the beginning, let's say since 2014, the defense budgets went up in all the nations. So in the alliance, the defense budgets went up 7 years before the war in Ukraine. And the nations started to order. And I was a chief of defense until 2021 in the spring. And we already saw that delivery times went to the right and the prices went up. But to a certain extent, I can understand in the beginning that industries were sort of cautious because the governments in the alliance were not very well known to stick to their decisions. So basically, you could order something and 2 years later it was cancelled or things like that. So there was this, it was almost, they didn't believe that it was actually going to happen, that the defense budgets were going to increase really for a longer time. But after 7 years, you can no longer say that it is a surprise that the budgets went up. So that's one. Secondly, we don't have a state-controlled economy like in Russia. So the outcome is a result of convincing private financiers that they need to invest more in the defense industry. It is about convincing those investors, and sometimes this is pension funds or this is banks. And there is pension funds or there are financiers that say we're not going to invest in the defense industry because it is not ethical. And I don't understand that because this is about our own defense. So there's a lot of things to overcome. And once you have an agreement amongst investors, then they need to talk to the industry. And then there needs to be a decision in the industry to build another production, more production capacity. And then there's the local authorities that need to approve on building an extra factory. And then. So these things take time. And we believe it takes too much time. We're 18 months into the war. And we need we need this ammunition. We need these capabilities, as General Christofferson said, for two reasons. One, to continue to support Ukraine, and secondly, to improve our own readiness, and in accordance with the agreements that were made in Vilnius. So this is very much a conversation. So if you are a CEO in a defense company and you can tell your shareholders that the portfolio is filled until 2032, you're a good CEO. They're very happy with you. But the chiefs of defense say that is not good enough. We need those capabilities and that ammunition earlier than 2032. And that tension is the tension between what is necessary for national security, for our alliance security, and the sort of more shorter-term thinking along the line of shareholder value. And I would very much like to see a discussion with the private sector on them joining the values discussion and not just the value discussion. And why is that important? Why is that in their strategic interest? Because I believe for 30 years, the industry in the Western world could basically, how do you say, they knew there was security. They knew there was stability. They never had to think about whether their factory would be there next week, whether the warehouse would be there next week, like in Ukraine. It's gone because of a bomb, because of a missile. So that sort of thinking in the longer term, if it happens, in Ukraine, 40% of the economy evaporated in the first days of the war. That was private money for a large extent. That money is gone. So I think that the private investors have a strategic interest in joining this discussion and to actually invest in defense, because it's not a given that there is stability and security in our nations. War is back in Europe.
Here at the front. And then...
Hi, Lolita Baldor with the Associated Press. Have you seen that these increase in prices and the lag and difficulties in production have impacted countries' ability to provide weapons, particularly ammunition, to Ukraine? Are you seeing the donations start to either lag, lessen, or stabilize at all?
I'm not going into specifics because this is, of course, confidential information. First and foremost, that is a decision of the nations. NATO is not organizing this. The Ukraine Defense Contact Group is an initiative by the United States with the 50 nations that donate money, lethal aid, non-lethal aid. So I'm not in a position to talk about the results of that conference because it's not under NATO. But it is true that nations are when they think about giving away weapons or ammunition, they have to think on the decision itself. Am I giving away? Second, what is the risk that I take against my own readiness in NATO, in my own country? And when they do, that is the result of that sort of discussion with the people that are involved in that decision. So, yes, most of the nations didn't start in a warehouse that was filled. It was probably somewhere here when they started to give away weapon systems. And the volume of the weapons and the ammunition that Ukraine requires is huge. I mean, that is one of the things that we also see in a war like this. Again, I would say, it's not new per se, but the scale and the volume of what is used is going beyond our production capacity. And so and then the only answer is you have a very full warehouse to compensate for a while that you don't have that capacity. And now we see that we're giving away weapons and at the same time we are ordering new ones. And they are not in balance. So that's why the call to the industry and the governments to have a more intense debate and a higher sense of urgency to solve the problem. And I don't think, I cannot say in response to your question that it hampers nations to give away weapons, because I'm not part of that debate in those nations. So that's not, it's a question I cannot answer. But in the general terms, this is the sort of thing they will think about.
Yep. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Alf Johnsen from VG Norwegian daily newspaper. It's my understanding that artillery ammunition and missiles are in high demand in regards to what you are talking about when it comes to boost military production. But is the situation so that the lack of ammunition, is that slowing Ukraine's ability to hit back to Russia for the time being? And my second question would go on the new defense plans, where NATO should increase from 40,000 to about 300,000 on higher readiness. And that's not done in a week. So how long time, what's your estimate of the time it will take to fill up the new demands in the new regional defense plans?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. There is not a direct correlation between the too low industrial defense capacity and the progress of the counteroffensive in Ukraine. There is no correlation. The reason why it takes the time that it takes the Ukrainians to take the land they take, and we are talking about 200-300 meters every day that they move forward. Not back and forth, they move forward every day. At high cost of lives of people wounded, and the Russians therefore lose every day 200-300 yards. Every day. The Russians are losing in that sense. So the reason why it takes time is because it is extremely dangerous, because there's an enormous amount of mines in a very deep minefield, more than 10 kilometers with 5-6 mines per square meter, and they have to crawl forward literally to get through, to clear the mines, to get to the next physical obstruction. And they have been successful. And yes, everybody, including the Ukrainians, would love to have go faster. But it is not possible. They are fighting a very, very difficult battle. They are moving forwards. The Russians are pushed back every day. But there is no correlation between the defense production. It's not that they cannot move forward because they do not have enough ammunition. That is not the case. Your second question is about the 40,000 and the 300,000. There is more soldiers than the 40,000 that we have under command of the Supreme Allied Commander Europe. So it's not that we only have 40,000 soldiers. We have under command of the Supreme Allied Commander by the nations, because NATO itself does normally not have troops. We get the troops from the nations. And the nations then put those troops under command of the Supreme Allied Commander Europe, which is under command of NATO. So there is more troops than the 40,000. And we went from 4,000 to 40,000 in a matter of days. And that was the result of all the work already done on these plans before they were approved. Because we were basically already 4 years working on these plans. So there was a lot of thinking already there, and there was a lot of preparations with the nations already there in terms of the military cooperation. So we were in a good position in a way when the war started, and we were then able to respond very, very quickly and be effective. The discussion on the 300,000 is that we need more readier soldiers. Why? Because if we are talking collective defense, you do not have the time to prepare for an attack if the attack happens. And it's not us planning that attack, it is the opponent planning that attack. And so if they attack, you have to be ready. And therefore we need more soldiers at a higher readiness. And you're right, that is not a switch. That is not something that happens overnight, because you will have to increase the recruitment, you will have to increase the training, they will need weapons, they will need ammunition, they will need all the things that additional soldiers need. But, as I said, there's more soldiers than the 40,000. So, the nations that are having the armed forces, I mean, we are talking in NATO as a whole, if Finland and Sweden have joined, of about 3.5 million soldiers in the alliance. So the 300,000 is the number where we talk about the number of soldiers that we foresee in, at a higher readiness, available for basically the first 30 days if it is necessary. And the rest is available for if the war would take longer, as we see in Ukraine, we're in the 18th month, then you will need more soldiers, but you have a bit of time to prepare the rest of them. So the 300,000 is what we want the nations to be able to produce at a higher readiness.
Okay, we have time to...
I would just like to add one thing, Alf-Bjarne. So the military leadership in Ukraine now has been fighting a war since 2014. The last 18 months, a very heavy war. They were able to fight back the first initial attack, and they continue to fight back the Russian forces. So I have full confidence that the decisions made in how they conduct this counteroffensive is based on very sound, good leadership from Ukrainian military officers.
Thank you, sir. We have time to do 3 more questions, so I propose Washington Post. We start with Washington Post, and then, yeah.
David Ignatius from the Washington Post. Admiral Bauer, this is the last NATO meeting that will be attended by General Milley, the American Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Could you say a few words about the role that he's played in the NATO response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine in particular? And do you have concerns that because of current political issues in the United States, there may be a significant delay in the confirmation of his successor?
Let me start by saying that Mark Milley is an amazing officer with an amazing career. He's a true friend. He's a great colleague to the Chiefs of Defense. And he has been an inspiration, not only for us, but also for the people in Ukraine. As the Ukrainian Chief of Defense in a meeting in January said, when that was just before the war, no, that was the January after the war started, General Zaluzhny paid tribute to Mark Milley because of what he has done and is doing for Ukraine. I'm sad to see Mark Milley go. All of us are sad to see Mark Milley go. He is, I think he's not only a great soldier, but he's a great human being who has been under tremendous stress in unusual circumstances. During his tenure, there was a pandemic. We left Afghanistan and the war in Ukraine. So in 4 years' time, he has seen an amazing sort of change of what the U.S. armed forces and NATO has gone through. When it comes to his succession, I mean, that's a political discussion in the U.S. That's not a NATO question. But the good thing in the military is that we have people that are, your deputy, the deputy commander, the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So if his successor is not confirmed, then I understand that the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff will take over, and he is also a very capable officer. I mean, that is not a question. Nobody doubts that. So in that sense, I don't have a concern there that the U.S. would respond in any different way than what we've seen with Mark Milley. But as a human being, as a soldier, as a friend, he will be dearly missed. And I actually gave a rather lengthy farewell speech to him in the military committee to honor his career and what he has done for the alliance and for the U.S. Armed Forces.
Right, so that means we have time for the 2 final questions. I'm going to ask you to bundle them together, and then we will hear the answer.
Thank you very much. It's a twofold question indeed. My name is Panagiotis Pavlos from Hellas Journal in New York, and my first part of question to Admiral Bauer is the following. I mean, whether at this present conference, in the part related to the southeast wing of the alliance, have you considered any provisions about promoting Greece's role as a security hub, both with regard to the east borders and the internal Balkan and East European region, provisions that would in a way challenge or affect the balance of power between Greece and Turkey. And the reason why I'm asking that is that because we see that Turkey holds a very firm relation with Russia, which is the object of the war in Ukraine, and this is indeed an oxymoron. And the second part of the question is to General Christopherson, whether would you see as a contingent a war between NATO and Russia, and even a nuclear war, and that in view of the fact that it's the first time that Norway since last year has been sending for the first time in its history weapons abroad. This is something completely new for the Norwegian culture. Thank you.
We didn't we didn't talk about very specific functions of the nations in the executability discussion, because the roles that the nations can play in the execution of the regional plans is very diverse. It ranges from the different services in their armed forces that perform a role. In different services, there can be command roles even in the nations. I know, for example, that there is the NRDC Corps in Greece that can play a role in the land command structure. But we didn't talk per nation on all the possible things that the different nations can play in the execution. So neither about Greece. In certain cases, the different nations ask or report the possibilities so that the Supreme Allied Commander Europe knows what the options are, and if a choice has to be made, that he is aware of the different possibilities. With regard to your remark on Greece and Turkey, that is a bilateral discussion. That is not a NATO discussion, so I'm not going to answer on that.
So Norway and Russia has not been to war for at least 1,000 years. So we are the only neighboring country that has not been in near history in war with Russia. President Putin knows very well that NATO is not a threat against Russia. He says that, but he knows that we are not threatening Russia. Neither Norway, nor Sweden, or Finland, or Poland, we are not threatening Russia. If he believed that we were threatening Russia, he couldn't have moved all his troops to Ukraine to fight the war there. So on our border, on the Norwegian border, there is maybe 20% or less forces left than it used to be before 24th of February 2022. So he has taken that risk because he knows that NATO is not threatening anyone. So, and President Putin is occupied in Ukraine, and President Putin started this war, and he can end it. He can pull out. Norway has since 1949 been a NATO member, and NATO has kept peace for its allies, for its members, ever since. So it's a long period of peace among NATO nations, and we have enjoyed that. And that's also why we need to continue to support Ukraine, because if we allow this to happen, then we have changed, we let Russia change some of the rules that has secured this peace since the end of World War II. So it was very early that Norway decided to move from non-lethal aid to anti-tank weapons, to artillery pieces, to air defense. It happened in a few weeks after the invasion on 24th of February. And we will continue. We have made a 5-year plan approved by all parties in Parliament, which gives me the foresight I need to plan for both donations, training, working with industry, but also buying back or buying new equipment to the Norwegian army to fill up the gaps based on what we are doing with Ukraine. So priority one now, support Ukraine for as long as it takes.
If I can build on the answer of General Christopherson, as he says, Russia knows NATO is not a threat because we're not intending to attack them. Otherwise, they would have responded completely different to the accession of Finland. And they haven't. They talk about it, but they haven't, in physical terms. The reason why Russia attacked, and the same applies for Ukraine. Ukraine wasn't a threat for Russia as well. The reason why they have attacked Ukraine were democracy, freedom, rule of law, and the fact that Ukraine more and more was wanting and willing and showing they were making their own decisions about their own future. And that was a danger, that is a danger, if that democracy settles more and more and becomes, in the heart of the Ukrainian thinking, as we see, then that is a danger to the Putin regime, because then people in Russia might start to think the same.
Thank you both. We have time for one very quick final question, and then we really have to wrap it up. Thank you.
Are you any closer to solving the puzzle of the Nordic countries' place in the joint force commands? Ransom versus Norfolk and such?
It's not a puzzle, actually. I think we agree on the fact that the Nordic nations rightfully sort of belong under command of the Joint Forces Command Norfolk. There's one practical issue, and that is that the present the setup of the command as it is too light. We know what it should be, and it needs an increase of about 400 people. To give you an idea, it needs about 400 people more to be able to conduct the tasks that come with those responsibilities. So it is now up to the nations, and not only the Nordic nations, but it is up to the allies, to the allied nations, to help to fill the Joint Forces Command Norfolk with the right people in the right numbers. And once that is the case, and they need infrastructure, and they need computers, and they need communication, and they need everything you need to run a command. And once that is in place, then you can shift those nations under his command. Not earlier, because otherwise he's unable to perform, to be responsible for the task. So it's not a puzzle, it is a practical puzzle in the sense that so I think there is an agreement. The nations in the Nordic nations are happy with this construct, but it will take a bit of time.
You're happy with that?
Yes, I'm very happy with Finland being a NATO member and Sweden soon becoming one. And also happy that we all agree that we should be under the same command. And Supreme Allied Commander Europe, Chris Cavoli, the Supreme Commander, he supports that. So he's the one who gives the final advice on the command and control structure. So we will find the good arrangements, and we will continue to man up as soon as possible. I said to the press earlier, I want it done by 2025. So that's what we are aiming for, but then there is a lot of practicalities, as Rob said. But then you have aligned, so the regional plans is about plans, it's about force structure requirements, what forces belongs to the different plans, and then in the end it's about command and control. So I think the force structure is more important now, because command and control is basically a line on a map. You can cross that line, it's not a wall. So Norway will still contribute with forces also in other joint forces commands, like, for instance, in Lithuania. So, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, General. Thank you, Admiral. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Have a wonderful evening in Oslo. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good questions.